At first, it seemed like just another Joe Rogan Experience episode. Joe is known for his unvarnished honesty, caffeine, and microphones. However, something was different this time. Joe spoke something in between the debate and the jokes. Erika Kirk, for whatever reason. A private discussion, a secret that only Charlie's parents should know. And the internet exploded. Why would Joe even know that? How did that conversation get to him? And most importantly, was any of it true? Others began to wonder. For millions of people, Joe Rogan has spent more than 10 years creating a kingdom from behind a microphone where truth meets controversy, where laughter melts into confrontation, and where every guest eventually says more than they intended. When Joe Rogan exposes something, it's never small. It's raw, viral, and unstoppable. And what Erika allegedly said that night could change everything the public thought they knew about the Kirk family. The cameras rolled, the red on-air light flickered to life, and Joe leaned forward with that familiar grin, half comedian, half interrogator. The guest list that night didn't include any Kirks, but the conversation somehow circled straight into their living room. It began innocently, a discussion about public figures who preach one thing and live another. Joe laughed. He shook his head and said, almost as if speaking from experience, "Man, you'd be surprised what some of these so-called faith influencers say when the cameras aren't rolling. Like the kind of stuff they tell their in-laws when it gets too heavy." He laughed afterward, making a casual remark, but the internet doesn't tolerate casual remarks. Within hours, the video went viral on Reddit and X comment sections, generating a lot of questions. Was he referring to Erika, Charlie Kirk's wife? How would Joe even know that? Did he just leak something personal? The timing was crucial because just a week prior, there had been rumors that the Kirks, a Christian values power couple who were constantly touring, posting, and being held up as models of moral perfection, were experiencing tension at home. According to whispers, Erika had recently broken down during a family get-together at Charlie's parents' house in Phoenix, and she had confessed that she felt trapped by the image they'd built together. "I just don't love who we have to pretend to be," she allegedly said. Whether on purpose or not, Joe had confirmed what everyone suspected. There was trouble inside America's most public Christian marriage. By the following morning, the hashtag #JoeRoganExposesAra was trending. Those words were never intended for an audience, but somehow they made their way. Somewhere along that chain of whispers, it seems they reached the world's most listened-to podcaster. TikTok was inundated with memes. Conservative pundits hurried to defend the Kirks, while progressive channels viewed the leak as evidence of hypocrisy. Erika, who was known for her reserved demeanor and few public remarks, disappeared from social media. Her most recent post, a gentle quotation about truth setting you free, was suddenly being scrutinized like evidence in a trial. And Charlie, who didn't rant or post videos, just tweeted 8 words that cut through the clutter. Everyone knew exactly who he meant. From a Turning Point event told an independent journalist that Joe had once been approached by someone close to the Kirks who wanted him to understand that Erika wasn't the ideal poster wife. Whether Joe believed it or not, he had mentioned the conversation on air, unaware of the wildfire it would ignite. While Erika's supporters felt betrayed, Joe's fans saw it as classic Rogan, the uncensored truth-teller poking at hypocrisy. They asked, "Since when does a conversation between a wife and her in-laws become podcast material?" Journalists started investigating and old interviews where Erika, "It's not about whether Joe told the truth. It's about whether the truth was his to tell." When TMZ caught Joe outside his Austin studio, a reporter yelled, "Did you mean a Rick Kirk?" Joe said, "I talk about human nature, not gossip," with a smile but no response, and turned to leave. That sounded like deflection to his audience, but to his detractors, it sounded like confirmation. Inside the Kirk household, silence wasn't peace. Friends described Charlie as distant but laser-focused, burying himself in work while Erika spent several weeks with her parents. Church appearances were discreetly canceled. Donations to their ministry fell for the first time in 2 years, and every reaction video, podcast breakdown, and tweet kept repeating Joe's line. "You'd be surprised what they tell their in-laws." And a dagger all at once. The true tragedy was that what was purportedly said wasn't scandalous. Rather, it was human. She was worn out from being flawless. She wanted room to breathe, to not always represent an idea bigger than herself. However, once those words were repeated by someone with a global platform, context disappeared. Vulnerability became ammunition. The problem with exposure is that, regardless of how small the secret is, once it's made public, it becomes poison. A member claiming to be close to the family posted, If Joe knew the full story, he'd regret saying it, in one of Reddit's more subdued sections. Erika was merely requesting compassion. No one was able to confirm it. However, the sentiment struck a chord, and the story started to change from scandal to melancholy, from mockery to sadness. Commenters who had previously laughed began to wonder if this was less about hypocrisy and more about how easily private suffering can become public entertainment. As the first week came to an end, Joe's episode continued to gain views, and millions of homepages on YouTube recommended it. Every new viewer fed the algorithm, and every replay amplified the echo. For Joe, it was another viral week. For the Kirks, it was the disintegration of a brand built on certainty. Somewhere between truth and exploitation, a line had been crossed, and no one could quite agree on who crossed it first. That's where our story starts. Joe Rogan had done what he always does, ignite a conversation the world wasn't ready to have, with one casual remark and one unguarded sentence. However, after the clip, silence can be louder than words, and for days, both Joe Rogan's and the Kirk family's silence was deafening. However, in today's world, silence isn't seen as grace, but rather as guilt. By the end of the week, YouTube analysts, political commentators, and drama channels were analyzing every frame of Joe's podcast. He smirked when he said it, knowing exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a slip. It was a statement. Hashtags took sides on social media. Team Joe versus Hash Protector. One side said Rogan was exposing hypocrisy, that he was shining a light on influencers who built brands on perfection while concealing chaos behind the scenes. The other saw a woman being humiliated for disclosing her feelings in private. The truth, however, was buried under thousands of retweets and reaction videos. In Austin, Rogan's studio was bustling with its typical controlled chaos, with clips from the episode being remixed into TikToks, and his producers were powerless to stop the flood. They recommended that he clarify the connection on air. "I don't walk things back," Joe remarked, leaning back in his chair. "People get what they want to hear." That was it for Rogan. However, it marked the beginning of Erika Kirk's public disintegration. Outside of her speeches, reporters started setting up camp. Christian bloggers conjectured about her union. Grainy pictures of her and her sister leaving a cafe were published by tabloids, which used them to create headlines such as "Erika seen in tears after Joe's shocking revelation." In the meantime, the Kirk family dinners were tense behind closed doors. Charlie's parents, whom he had previously confided in, became the focal point of a national spectacle. The family's close friends expressed their devastation. What was supposed to be a vulnerable moment has turned into a public battleground. The insider was later informed by one of Charlie's former college pals. The hurt wasn't caused by the words. It was the ease with which they might be turned against them. Erika had faith in her family, but now it seems like microphones are embedded in the walls. The expression, "even the walls have microphones," quickly gained popularity. It turned into the scandal's unofficial catchphrase. Podcasters reiterated it. It was used by memes. It encapsulated the world's anxiety about celebrity, privacy, and the ease with which trust could be transformed into popular material. Ironically, the same line was used against Joe Rogan by his detractors. Because among all of them, who had the largest microphone? Joe himself. His own audience soon started to put more pressure on him. After praising Rogan's sincerity, viewers started to doubt his morality. Was this more about clicks than it was about the truth? The chat was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. Joe's longtime friend and fellow podcaster is Lex Fridman. In one of his episodes, Lex made a subtle remark. There's a fine line between revealing truth and stealing peace. Sometimes the cost isn't worth the clip. It wasn't a direct call-out, but everyone understood who he meant. The internet thrives on drama, and this comment poured gasoline on the fire. Meanwhile, Erika broke her silence by posting a single statement on her Instagram story on a calm Sunday afternoon. It had a white background, black text, and no music. It said, "I forgive, but I won't forget who profited from my suffering." After a day, it vanished, but screenshots went viral. Comments flooded in. She's talking about Joe. She knows it's true, but she's not denying it. Forgiveness or shade? The ambiguity only heightened the fascination. 2 days later, Rogan indirectly addressed it on his podcast with comedian Tim Dillon, laughing about how the internet loves to play connect the dots. "Man, I could say someone once told their dog a secret and the internet would have that dog trending." He was denying it in that joke, which made it both humorous and heartbreaking. In media circles, that moment became the new focal point of analysis. People slowed down the footage, watching Rogan's eyes dart to the side. Psychology experts on TikTok claimed his micro-expressions showed guilt. It became less about truth and more about performance. Even the Daily Beast wrote a feature titled, "When the King of Podcasts Becomes the Story," because for the first time, Joe was more than just the host. He was the headline. Meanwhile, Erika's world continued to shrink. Speaking engagements were canceled because of security concerns. Church leaders advised her to pray for discernment rather than retaliation. However, behind closed doors, she was reportedly devastated. According to a close friend who later spoke off-record, she didn't care about the rumors. Instead, she cared that Joe was someone she and Charlie used to listen to his podcast together, and it felt like a mentor to have him reveal something so intimate. However, a week later, another piece of the puzzle emerged. A leaked text thread purportedly between an anonymous producer and a friend of Joe's. The messages read, "He knew it was a Ricker. He said it off the record before the show." Screenshots went viral online and the scandal abruptly reappeared. This time, it wasn't just about what was said to Charlie's parents. It was also about whether for years, Joe Rogan's strength had been his independence and refusal to answer to the mob, but this time, that independence came off as arrogance. His silence didn't calm the storm. Instead, it fueled it. Within 2 weeks, the narrative flipped, and Rogan was no longer seen as the truth teller. News anchors debated it, YouTubers dramatized it, and Joe remained silent. Erika remarked, "The hardest part of faith in public life is that your mistakes become everyone's entertainment, and your pain becomes their proof." In a little clip from an old interview that surfaced years before this incident, far before any of the hoopla around it, it was an emotional turn of events. For the first time since the controversy started, the public began to show sympathy for her after that video went viral under the hashtag #HashLetHerHeal. Even Joe's supporters began to acknowledge that perhaps, just possibly, he had gone too far this time. However, if Joe Rogan had really exposed Erika, then who exposed Joe? Because, as we're about to see, Part 3 reveals something nobody anticipated. A secret that completely changes the narrative. The internet believed it had the whole story, with Joe Rogan exposing Erika Kirk, the Kirks going silent, and a marriage based on faith collapsing under pressure. However, like every viral storm, there was a shadow beneath the headlines, and when the truth finally came to light, it wasn't what anyone had anticipated. By mid-month, rumors of a leaked producer chat started circulating through small online forums. Screenshots of internal messages from Rogan's production team initially appeared phony, fuzzy, and misspelled. Convenient, but in a late-night Reddit AMA, one of Joe's former assistant editors, who had secretly quit the company months earlier, confirmed their legitimacy. The editor commented, "It was bait." Joe was informed that Erika had made a significant statement against Charlie's family, and he brought it up on the radio to see how people would respond. Everything was turned upside down when it was revealed that Joe wasn't disseminating a secret. Rather, he was testing who inside his own circle had leaked to him. The same editor, Rogan, had heard the initial story weeks earlier from a reliable friend, a mutual acquaintance in the world of conservative influencers, who claimed to have overheard Ricker's private conversation with Charlie's parents. However, something didn't add up, and the story kept changing, with details changing depending on who told it. So Joe did what Joe does best. He experimented live. That one line on the podcast, "You'd be surprised what some people say to their in-laws," wasn't an exposé. It was bait to get rid of the person who was providing false information to his network. The internet doesn't do nuance, so by the time his plan began to work, Erika's reputation had already been irreparably damaged. Inside the Rogan studio, the atmosphere changed from excitement to dread as online outrage grew. One of the producers, identified only as Dave, warned Joe via leaked emails saying, "They think it's about you. You've got to clarify before this gets ugly." According to reports, Joe responded, "If I explain it, I validate it. Give them the freedom to think as they like. The truth will come to light." Soft-spoken retired pastor Charlie's father made a rare statement to a small Arizona newspaper saying, "We know who we are. We know what was said and what wasn't. The truth may take time, but it always arrives." In private, sources claimed that the statement was a coded message directed directly at Rogan because, according to those close to the family, the Kirks had finally discovered the true origin of, in other words, Joe had repeated a distortion of a distortion, and the internet treated it like gospel. A few days later, Vanity Fair published an investigative piece titled "Faith Fame" and the leak that shook the podcast world. The rumor had originated with a family friend who had attended that dinner where Ara spoke openly. That friend had twisted her words, then passed the story along, adding spice to impress others in their circle. Eventually, it made its way to Rogan through a chain of mutual acquaintances. When Rogan's team was contacted for comment, they declined, but the story included a small, eerie detail. One of Rogan's producers allegedly whispered before hanging up, "Joe wanted to expose a liar and ended up becoming one." It painstakingly reconstructed the timeline, confirming what insiders had suspected. Joe had never spoken directly to anyone in the Kirk family. His information came secondhand and was purposefully manipulated by someone seeking attention. And the original source had since deleted their social media accounts after being identified by fans. Both sides suffered greatly from the emotional fallout. For Erika, the damage was already done. She couldn't undo the humiliation of having her private words misrepresented and shared with millions of people. However, rather than back down, she started to reclaim her story, posting a 10-minute video titled, "When They Tell Your Story for You," a week later. "I've been quiet because I wanted peace," she said, "but silence can make lies grow louder." She was sitting by herself in it with no makeup, a simple background and a shaky yet steady voice. "I spoke during a painful moment. I mentioned that I was exhausted. I said that I was having trouble. However, I never expressed a desire to divorce my spouse. I never claimed to be done with faith." These phrases were pilfered, perverted, and exploited for amusement. She spoke in a heartbreakingly real tone. "Just melancholy without resentment or hatred," she whispered. "I hope Joe realizes that truth isn't a game, but I forgive him. You don't use people's lives as experiments." The video received more than 1 million views in a matter of hours. There was an abundance of support in the comment section, even from unexpected sources. Journalists, preachers, and influencers all issued public apologies for drawing hasty judgments. The storyline changed for the first time since the epic started, yet the twist wasn't finished because the internet is the internet. Footage appeared the following morning. The night following Erika's post is purportedly captured in a leaked behind-the-scenes film from Rogan's studio. Joe may be heard conversing with his staff in it. "Yes, I did watch the video. She's right. I messed up the delivery. I was attempting to expose the setup, not the person," he added. "But when you throw gasoline into the video, went viral right after. The wind, it lands where it wants." Suddenly, the man who had made a name for himself by never saying sorry appeared regretful. Fans were taken aback. The sentence, "gasoline into the wind," was repeated by commentators as though they were deciphering a confession. Even though Joe hadn't apologized in public yet, his quiet admission was more powerful than any news announcement. A peculiar sense of equilibrium started to reappear toward the end of that week. The initial question persisted even after the uproar subsided and the memes subsided. Was Rika telling lies when she talked to Charlie's parents? Or was Joe telling the truth? In actuality, neither was important anymore. What was important was the lessons it taught the entire world. That even a whisper may turn into a fight in the era of microphones and headlines. This was not a scandal about the truth, as one journalist put it. Who gets to tell it first was the subject of a scandal. For Joe, it was a unique setback that marred an otherwise unbreakable legacy. It was a difficult redemption for Erika. Her quiet had been turned into a weapon, yet her voice came back. It served as a reminder to everyone watching that nobody escapes unscathed when celebrity and faith collide and microphones and secrets collide. Even when the storm had passed, there was still an overwhelming calm. Joe Rogan remained silent for weeks. There was an unsettling silence, no Instagram announcement and no podcast monologue. The kind of silence that weighs more than sound. Erika Kirk's poignant video, meanwhile, kept going viral. It wasn't controversial. It wasn't overly dramatic. It was genuine. And for some reason, that had a greater impact than anything Joe could have said in front of a microphone. The return episode should be hashed. Then, out of the blue, a new episode appeared on Spotify one evening. Joe Rogan clarifies the situation in 2-3-19. Joe was the only one in the thumbnail. He was alone with a microphone, no visitor, no smile, no whiskey glass. It became viral online in a matter of minutes. Expecting rage, justifications, or at the very least the old Rogan bluster, fans flocked in. However, they received something quite different. Joe started out softly. "You know, there are moments when you believe you are in charge of the narrative. You believe that you are conducting the experiment and posing the questions. However, I was the experiment this time." The tone was unvarnished, introspective, and even shattered. He continued by explaining that the Erika Kirk narrative was intended as a test for his own team rather than as rumors or publicity. He was informed that Erika had made startling remarks on Charlie's family, and he was curious as to which members of his inner circle would divulge the information once he made a suggestion on television. "I thought I was being clever," he said. Turns out recklessly. Joe spoke for the next hour. No cuts, no interruptions. He explained the misinformation game over the phone that got out of hand. "She's trending, her family is in pain, and people are calling me a serpent after I just said one ambiguous sentence. I didn't stop a lie, but I also didn't spill one." He hesitated for a second, allowing that to rest on such a large platform. Intent is irrelevant. Impact does. Those remarks were particularly painful for devoted Rogan fans, who respected his defiance of media pressure. However, this was not bowing. Behind closed doors, it was possessing an explosive sign. Several insiders disclosed what had been going on behind the scenes during Joe's quiet after the podcast was released. According to reports, Spotify's legal staff had advised him to keep quiet until their own internal investigation was over. Concerns were raised over the platform's public image, contract conditions, and defamation. One executive source claims that until they were certain there had been no deliberate harm, they did not want him to speak. Joe insisted on speaking his way once the truth was revealed. No PR filter, no script. That choice was successful. Hashtags like Hasha deserves better were trending simultaneously in less than a day. For the first time, all parties saw that the viral outrage machine had taken advantage of everyone. Someone whose hands are in prayer. Rick's or Eric's answer. Erika Kirk posted a video answer titled, "Forgiven," the following morning. It began with a Proverbs passage. "Anyone who spreads slander and hides enmity with false lips is a fool." Then she gave a small smile, not calmly, but bitterly. Joe said he was sorry, and I'm grateful for that. However, this was never about me versus him. It concerns all of us. The way we handle words and turn suffering into content. She concluded with a subdued yet impactful statement. The internet can forgive, but it doesn't forget. "Fade to black" was the final line of the video, and it would go on to appear in several articles, podcasts, and thought pieces. The fallout is hashed by scales. Both sides had suffered at that point. Rogan's reputation had not broken, but bruised. He had openly accepted responsibility, something very few people in his position ever do. Spotify reaffirmed its support for his program, while enforcing new internal standards for ethical content. Charlie Kirk and Erika came out stronger than before. Their supporters came together. Erika's calm power made her an unexpected voice for digital empathy, and their family gatherings became symbols of openness and grace. Ironically, millions of people learned the truth about them because of the dispute that nearly killed them. The truth about the performing arts. A media documentary called Echoes of a Lie, the Rogan-Kirk fallout debuted on Netflix a few months later. It dissected the whole story in forensic detail. How human curiosity, social media algorithms, and podcasts turned a whispered rumor into a worldwide story. Few people were aware of what the documentary disclosed. Since then, the original source, the one who misrepresented Erika's private statements, has privately apologized to both parties. However, Joe and Erika promised to keep that person's identity a secret, so the internet never learned who it was. Another villain is not necessary. "We need closure," Joe stated, and that was the last turning point in their development. Speech balloon, today's legacy of the lie. One of the most studied viral events in contemporary podcast culture is the Erika Kirk leak. A warning on truth, accountability, and influence. It is a prime example of narrative distortion, according to media professors. How easily a tale can change when it passes through echo chambers, emotion, and celebrity. Months later, in an unrelated show, even Joe made reference to it. Curiosity without context is a weapon, and sometimes you point it in the wrong direction, as I discovered the hard way. Individual. That statement gained notoriety and was frequently shared, cut, and repeated online. The last reflection should be fired. This ultimately has nothing to do with Joe Rogan versus Erika Kirk. It was about the fine line that separates entertainment from reality, and how that line hardly exists now in the era of quick indignation. Did you hear what she said with each click, each post? Turns into a ripple that can destroy someone's tranquility. And perhaps, just possibly, everyone became aware of how precarious that balance actually is at this point. It began with a single sentence, the "but honesty ended it." The narrator continues as the camera cuts to Rogan's studio light, which was formerly used to showcase gossip, but is now dimmed in silent self-awareness. And one question remains as the dust settles. What actually took place in the background prior to Joe's apology being broadcast? We haven't seen one part of the narrative, according to insiders. Joe allegedly said, "You'd be shocked if you knew who told me first," in a deleted recording that was retrieved hours before it was uploaded. Who was he referring to? A friend, a producer, or a member of the Kirk family? Perhaps there was more to this than a simple miscommunication. Perhaps it was a setup. One rumor, one microphone, one unspoken truth. Because silence does not equate to tranquility in Joe Rogan's reality. It indicates that the following revelation has already begun to load. Before you scroll, keep in mind that the most important secret isn't what he said, but rather who intended it to be heard. White right index pointing backhand. Keep an eye out since things will change in the future. Keep an eye out since things will change in the future.